To agree to embrace land use planning to reduce human-wildlife conflict and avoid loss of wildlife space through urbanization. As you heard, and given by the speaker from Narok County, and indicating some of the urbanization going on around there that may be taking away space for wildlife, and of course largely going to impact on the wildlife species there. And also we've heard, I think there was a suggestion here about the fact that we lack land use policy in this country. Now, since we may not be able to influence that immediately, at least there's something we can do at that level, and that is something like developing a plan, a land use plan. And I think in Amboseli ecosystem area, there's a plan that has been developed that apparently has been gazetted. So we have a precedence here, okay? Then to agree to develop alternative livelihoods for communities in wildlife areas that are eco-friendly and beneficial to both human and wildlife. And I think here this is a combination of what Tom Lampard told us they're doing at NRT, but at the same time, we heard from Jake about some of these ideas on tourism. To agree to increase our efforts on capacity building and empowerment of the female gender and youth in wildlife conservation. And again here, I think we heard from Rezon? Yes, yeah, and I think maybe it's something that we should do across the board, and it's doable. It's not something that is difficult to get going here. To agree to increase our efforts on capacity, I've just read that one. To inculcate indigenous values among communities living with wildlife. Now here, we heard today that a lot of the community values are being lost because of the change in culture, urbanization, religious issues, etc. And we were told by a number of the key informants today among the speakers. But we also heard from Tom Lalampa that maybe conservancies could be an avenue to actually inculcate this among communities. So that is the genesis of this particular point. To agree to adopt the application of policy tools such as payment for ecosystem services and RED Plus to increase our revenue for wildlife space. And I think this was said largely by people in Chulu and I'm not sure where else. But these are policy tools that are easily available. I think in Taita Taveta, they're using it in Kasigao. They're using the payment for ecosystem services. But there are readily available tools that can be incorporated in all the conservancies, where there are forested areas. And you can incorporate both the PES as well as the RED Plus. To agree to pay tribute to communities living with wildlife for their sacrifice to support coexistence of high diversity and biomass of wildlife in Kenya. So this is basically, we have to really appreciate what the communities living wildlife have done to date. To agree that we need support from the national and county government and the private sector. So I think from the discussion here, it was clear that there are a lot of issues that we need to engage the national government to undertake, but also it was clear that we still need to engage with the private sector and the conservation NGOs. So the declaration therefore continues this way. Now these are what we think are the national and county government obligations. To agree to request for support for adequate funding of the wildlife sector. Now, I think it's been said over and over again that there's hardly any funds that go into the wildlife sector in the national budget. And therefore, this is something that needs to be lobbied for so that there could be adequate funding to support this. To agree to request for reinvigoration of the gazetted national parks and reserves. And this, again, was brought up by Tom earlier. But, of course, what we've just heard from Taita Taveta indicated clearly that the Tsavo West, Tsavo East, as they're saying, has become ranches. So we need to really get back our values of the national parks and reserves. So to To agree to seek for the development, production, and airing of local programs on importance of wildlife. Now, you heard this morning that Kenyans are yearning for wildlife information. But at the same time, if you watch our television, we are just seeing soap operas from Nigeria, etc., that keep rolling most part of the day. So maybe we need to lobby for some of this to happen, for capturing of some of this information, and therefore they can be rolling. But of course, if you have DSTV, maybe you'll get National Geographic rolling, etc., and they're telling you about many different places. So why can't we do it locally? Why can't the government support this kind of program? Okay. To agree for the development of policy and legislative frameworks that recognize community land rights. So one of the issues that we are told here is that there's a community land bill that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And of course, we were also told that a legislation without a policy backing is basically on sandstone. So you need a policy, and therefore, to operationalize the policy, we need the legislation. So that's again one of the things that we are declaring here. To agree to seek for the development of a wildlife policy. Again, that was mentioned earlier. We know we have a wildlife law, but there's no policy. So that's a problem. To agree to seek for the development of guides and regulations for the Wildlife Act. Now, we are told the Wildlife Act has been around since 2013, but there are no regulations to guide a number of things that are supposed to be undertaken. So, to agree to seek for appropriate compensation for community lands lost to mega infrastructural development. And you heard today about the LAPSET, and the LAPSET is going to go through Garissa, maybe Arawale Reserve, is going to go through Isiolo, Samburu, Baringo, and most of the wildlife corridors, if not the wildlife conservancies, are likely to be impacted. Then, of course, we have the wayleaves, like the power in Marsabit will be passing through some of these areas. And we were told again that at the moment the compensation is, very flimsy because the communities are trying to negotiate by themselves. But we seek better compensation on this. To agree to seek for funding for the reclamation of wildlife corridors. And I think example was given about the Kitengela area and the need to buy off the land because it's under private use now. And I think another one was given, I can't remember the name, somewhere in Amboseli area. Is it Majimoto or something? That these issues are impacting on wildlife conservation. To agree to operationalize, to agree to seek for the operationalization of the wildlife compensation scheme. We hear the scheme is there, but it's not functional. To agree to seek for recognition of indigenous and local knowledge in conservation policies. Now, we've heard about the local governance system. Now, that local governance system need to be actually captured when you are doing the national policies, because then that way people can relate with those policy issues, and therefore you have a better chance of your policy being functional. So that's really what we're talking about here. To agree to seek for instituting or disseminating long-term research to support rationalization of community development and wildlife needs. Now, we know that there are community needs. We know that the government needs to develop areas. We also we know that there are wildlife needs. And we just heard from the KWS officer that they have a lot of information. Now, if that information is existing, it's not being disseminated properly. If the information does not exist, we need to undertake research. So that is the essence of this particular point, that we need to institute long-term research. But if the research has already been undertaken, then we need to gather that information and disseminate it so that we can use it to plan our areas better. Then I have only 3 points that I have so far for the private sector and conservation NGOs. And the obligation is this, to agree to engage the private sector in planning wildlife conservation strategies, so that next time there's this kind of meeting, we need to see them around here, so they participate in this. To agree to engage the private sector to support community conservancies. We need to engage, as indicated earlier, the corporates. How can they support the community conservancies directly, maybe through whatever means they have, maybe corporate social responsibility or something else.
Personal, but also collective responsibility. Yes. Thank you very much.
Today are basically a contract that communities living with wildlife wants to have with the government. And what the community has asked for is better recognition in terms of the role that they play in conserving our wildlife. So they have asked me on behalf of all these communities, and these are communities from Kajiado, communities from Narok, communities from Taita Taveta, communities from West Pokot, communities from Garissa, basically a representation of the communities that live with our wildlife. They want more recognition of the role that they play in wildlife conservation. They are keen to continue living and coexisting with wildlife, but what they're asking the government for is more funding. So they've given me a contract, and they've asked me to send that contract to the highest office in the country, and that is to present the contract to the president. I have given the elders my word that I will present this contract to His Excellency the President, and I will actually do that in their presence. So I'll make the appointment with the President and present that contract to him, so that the community elders and the President has an agreement on how they can manage wildlife going forward. In 1989, President Moi burned 12 tons. In 2011, President Kibaki burned 5 tons. And in 2015, last year, President Kenyatta burned 15 tons. During that event, what President Kenyatta directed me to do was to burn the entire stockpile by the end of the year, which was December 2015. Upon further consultation, we decided that if we're going to burn the entire stockpile, we might as well make it a big international event, so that we could send a very strong message to the world that for us, our philosophy has always been that ivory has no economic value, rhino horn has no economic value. The value that ivory and the value that rhino have are worth more when they are on the live animal. So this is part of our mission to stop the domestic trade in ivory, and also as part of our mission to move, in terms of CITES, to move all African elephant populations into Appendix 1.